Good morning, everybody. We're here in this really beautiful place, Belvedere House, and what I'm just going to talk to you about is some of the owners of the house, including the man who will be one of the main focuses of our conference today, Charles Howard Bury, the Everest explorer. This house, Belvedere, was built around 1740. The architect was Richard Castle, and it was built essentially as a hunting lodge for Robert Rochford, who became first Earl of Belvedere. This is Robert here, wearing the robes of a peer of the realm. He was a member of the Irish House of Lords. Born in 1708, became a member of Parliament for Westmeath when he was just 23. Came from a family extremely involved in politics and the military and land ownership in 18th century Ireland. His grandfather had been the Attorney General of Ireland and was actually responsible for drawing up much of the legislation we refer to as the penal laws. Robert was married twice. His first wife died from smallpox only a couple of years into their marriage, and they had no children. So he then married Mary Molesworth, who was just 16. He was 28, she was 16. A beautiful girl from a very powerful and significant Dublin family. Her grandfather, Robert Molesworth, was a noted philosopher and one of those involved in the development of what would become patriot politics and indeed 18th century republicanism. Mary, her family were very keen for her to marry Robert Rochford because he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. She wasn't so happy about it, but she didn't really have much say in the matter. And so she was married to this young and very wealthy man who was described as being a very handsome man, a man of considerable talent and abilities, elegant and expensive in his tastes, and with highly polished manners. However, he was also considered by many to be haughty and vindictive and selfish and dissipated. And the marriage was not a happy one. They had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, and then things began to go seriously wrong. He was spending less and less time with her. He was having affairs. She was accused of having an affair with her neighbour and brother-in-law, Arthur Rochford. She always denied that. But in any case, she ended up being basically put under house arrest by her husband and spent 30 years under house arrest, not at this place, Belvedere. She probably never set foot here, but at their main house, Galstown House, a few miles from here at Rochford Bridge. And she remained there until he died. He'd also gone after his brother Arthur. There was definitely a vindictive streak in Robert. He never forgot a slight, and he pursued his brother, who had gone abroad but then very unwisely came back to Dublin and found himself charged with basically adultery. Ended up actually in prison, in the debtor's prison, and there he remained, and he actually died in prison. Now, Robert Rochford lived a life of luxury here at Belvedere. There were wonderful accounts of 7-course dinners, just himself and maybe one other person, and 7- and 8-course dinners with a whole tribe of servants there looking after them. He seems to have had quite a wild sort of life. He certainly drank a great deal. I've been trying to find something good to say about him. It's very difficult. He's not known as the Wicked Earl for nothing. The one sort of thing that you could say about him was he was not bigoted. He was, in fact, had close friends among the Roman Catholic clergy in Westmeath. He protected a couple of priests from overzealous people who wanted to enforce the penal laws against clergy. And he helped to fund the building and then rebuilding of a very fine Catholic parish church in Mullingar, which stood where the present-day parish community centre stands. But he was not generally loved, and he knew that, and when he died at the 1774, his funeral took place at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the only people in attendance were a couple of servants and a clergyman. That was the end of Robert. And he was the first owner of Belvedere. He had this place built. He had the Jealous Wall built, the biggest folly in Ireland, primarily so that he wouldn't have to see his brother's magnificent mansion just a little further down the lake shore, Chuddenham House. Can't help feeling there's a nice little twist of fate there that must have Robert smiling from whatever corner of hell he's in, because his house is still standing intact while Chuddenham is now in ruins. The succession and the ownership of the house then passed to his eldest son, George. George, like his father, was a member of Parliament for Westmeath for a number of years, and he was High Sheriff of the county of Westmeath, which basically meant he was the Crown's representative here. And he was married twice. His first wife was Dorothea Bloomfield from County Offaly, and they built the house that is now the core of the Bloomfield Hotel. The Bloomfield beside us here was part of the Belvedere estate up until the 1930s. And after Dorothea died, he remarried, and his second wife was Jane Mackay, and she becomes Countess of Belvedere, and she's known for the rest of her life as Jane, Countess of Belvedere. A very significant patron of part of the estates of the Rochfords, the village of Turles Pass. Turles Pass is largely her creation, the beautiful green, the churches, the Methodist Chapel, the Church of Ireland, the houses around the green. And she was very deeply interested in the welfare of the tenants, the people who lived in Turles Pass, and is still highly regarded in that area. But she doesn't appear to have actually lived here at Belvedere very much. In fact, George Rochford, second and last Earl of Belvedere, spent most of the last decade of his life. He died in 1814 in England. And the house then passed, the next owner of the house here was actually the only woman who ever owned it or even lived here for any length of time, and that was another Jane, Countess of Lanesborough. She was Robert and Mary Rochford's daughter, their only daughter, and she inherited Belvedere House when she was 77 years of age, and she was quite happy about that. There was a long-running court case between Jane, Countess of Lanesborough, and her sister-in-law, Jane, Countess of Belvedere, over the estates and who was entitled to what. It became known as the War of the Two Janes. And the Jane, Countess of Belvedere, there were women had very limited rights to own property at that time, so she hired a lawyer called Abraham Boyd to look after her interests and ended up actually marrying him. He took the Rochford name with his own, and their line of family became the Boyd Rochfords, and they would live mainly at Middleton Park and Castletown Gagan from the mid-19th century. Captain Arthur Boyd Rochford, who won the Victoria Cross in the First World War and would have been a close friend of Colonel Howard Bury, would have also been his cousin, so they were all connected. But anyway, Jane, Countess of Lanesborough, inherits Belvedere. Again, she's involved in a lot of kind of charitable work. She too was married twice. Her first husband was the second Earl of Lanesborough, and they had, I think, 8 children. And then when he died, she married a guy from London called John King, whose actual original name was Jacob Rea. He was of Sephardic Jewish extraction and worked as a banker and a money lender to many of the young and aristocrats of Ireland. When they were short of money, as a lot of them were, he was the man they went to for financial assistance. Now, when she died, the Countess of Lanesborough, the next owner here was her grandson, whose name was Brinsley Butler. Butler was the family name of the Earls of Lanesborough. He did not live very long, and on his death around 1847, the estate here, Belvedere, came into the possession of the Countess of Lanesborough's grandson, who was Charles Brinsley Marley. And Charles Brinsley Marley was a really quite fascinating individual, described as the gorgeous landlord of Westmeath. He had huge estates. Apart from Belvedere here, he had lands across Westmeath, including the town of Kinnegad. He also had lands in Cavan and in Louth and in Limerick. Altogether, he was listed in the 1870s as having about 12,000 acres. And the rental income from that would have been very, very considerable indeed. He was born in 1831. He was related to the great patriot politician Henry Grattan. He was also, I think, the grandson or great-grandson of a Church of Ireland bishop of Dromore. The bishop and Marley Park in Dublin is named after his grandfather. He was educated at Eton College and at Trinity College. Had a great love for the arts and culture. He was an extremely cultured man. And he comes to Belvedere for the first time when he's about 18, 19 years of age, and is welcomed by the tenantry with banners and welcome to our dear landlord. Well, you hope for the best. And in the case of Charles Brinsley Marley, their hopes were in fact very much realised. He was a seriously good landlord. When times were bad, he cut rents and at times, froze the rents completely. When there was economic depression and high unemployment, he set out to try and get as much work as he could for local people, whether it was even digging ditches or doing building work or whatever, but he provided employment. He built a parochial house for the parish priest of Kinnegad. The house is still standing and lived in today. He funded the building of cottages for his farm workers across his lands. And as was noted at the time of the land wars, and the time of what were called the four Fs, the free sale, fixity of tenure, and the freedom of tenants to not be evicted if they were paying a fair rent. It was noted by one Land League official in Westmeath that the demands of the Land League were already being implemented on the estates of Charles Brinsley Marley. Now he had said he did a lot of work here at Belvedere. He also had a love and passion for plants and flowers, and it's under his time, he spent quite a lot of time here at Belvedere. He laid out the walled garden. He also laid out the terraces and steps there. And his work here, the work that he had done for him by various architects, was noted by others, including his brother-in-law, the Duke of Rutland, who had his own estates in England at Bowood. He too put in walled gardens and terraces after seeing the work that Charles Brinsley Marley had commissioned here. Brinsley Marley was briefly involved in politics. That was almost taken for granted, that if you belonged to his class that you would be involved with politics. He would have served on the grand jury for Westmeath and also, I think, on the grand jury for County Cavan. Before county councils, the grand juries comprised primarily of the landlord class. They were responsible for road building and maintenance, for raising funds for other things. Just basically they did the same work that the county councillors would later do, they just weren't elected. And he served as High Sheriff for Westmeath and also for Cavan. He was briefly going to be actually a member of Parliament. He almost certainly would have been elected. He stood in the general election of 1865. And he stood as a Conservative, but as he said, a Conservative but not a bigot. He was very much kind of ahead of his time in his friendly relationships with Catholic clergy and the Catholic people. He was a fairly devout member of the Church of Ireland, but he had a good relationship with Roman Catholics. And he was running for election, and then some of his election team put up a number of posters around the place making rather disparaging comments about his opponents, who included Lord Greville, the owner of Mullingar, who was standing for the Liberal Party. And when he heard about these posters, Marley withdrew from the election. You can't help feeling that he really wasn't cut out for a political career, and he never ran for election again. He was involved with the British Conservative Party. He was one of the founding members of an organisation which I think still exists, called the Primrose League, which was set up in honour of the Conservative leader and sometime Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. But he concentrated mostly on just running his estates here and looking after his tenants. Now, his love of art, he had a major art collection. Most of the art collection was kept at his house in London, but he also kept some of the paintings here. His collection included a Raphael. And he was a member of various literary and artistic groups. He lectured to the Burlington Fine Arts place in London on themes such as one rather intriguing one, the nobility of women. He never married, but he liked women, and there are stories about him courting wealthy widows and bringing them from walks around the grounds here at Belvedere, and there's a section that is known sort of as kind of the widow's walk, but he never actually did marry. So his art collection was very considerable, and he left his collection, most of it, to the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge University. He helped to fund the building of the art gallery in that museum, which is still there. There's a curious coincidence that a century after Marley, or as time, the Fitzwilliam Museum acquired a house which had belonged to a member of Parliament and journalist who was a stepson of the third Lord Greville. So there's that connection, another connection to Westmeath there. And so most of his collection is in Cambridge. He also left a lot of his papers and manuscripts and things to Nottingham University, and they're in the library of Nottingham University. Now, towards the end of his life, Brinsley Marley took an interest in the work and exploits of his cousin, the young Charles Howard Bury. Howard Bury used to affectionately refer to Brinsley Marley as Cousin B. And when Charles Brinsley Marley died with no issue in 1912, he left this beautiful house and estate to Charles Howard Bury. And this is Charleville Castle in Tullamore, which is where Charles Howard Bury spent much of his childhood, although he did frequently visit Belvedere and visit Cousin B here. Charles Howard Bury was born in London in August 1883. His lineage was rather fascinating and can be traced back to King Edward III of England, to the premier nobility of England, the Howards, Dukes of Norfolk and Earls of Suffolk, as well as the premier noble family of Scotland, the Campbells, Dukes of Argyll. His father, Captain Kenneth Howard, was a military officer a brilliant writer, and you can see how Howard Bury, where he got his talent for descriptive writing. He gets it from his father. His father was an army engineer who worked in India and in Canada and in other places, and left rather fascinating diaries and accounts of his travels. But when Charles Howard Bury was only a baby, his father became seriously ill and he died, whereupon another of Howard Bury's cousins became his guardian, and this was this James Petty Fitzmaurice, 5th Marquess of Lansdowne, a man of incredible importance in late 19th, early 20th century British politics. He was Governor-General of Canada, Viceroy of India, Secretary of State for War, leader of the House of Lords, and many other positions as well, and had huge estates in County Kerry. And Charles Howard Bury again spent part of his childhood in those estates in Kerry. He grew up, as at London, Charleville, where he was kind of homeschooled by French and German governesses before going to Eton College. His mother was from the Bury family of Charleville Castle, Earls of Charleville. Howard Bury's great-grandmother, who would have been Brinsley Marley's, I think, grandmother, had been a very notable figure in literary life in the early 19th century, corresponding with Byron and Shelley and Coleridge and other poets of the age. He was corresponding with Percy Shelley while he was still a schoolboy. And Charleville Castle in the early 19th century had hosted fantastic parties attended by all the literary figures of the age and others, including members of the British royal family. Howard Bury went to Eton College, just like his cousin B, and then he went to Sandhurst Military Academy, and on graduating from Sandhurst he was posted to the India, the jewel in the crown of Britain's empire, and he spent the next 8 years as a soldier in India. His career prospered. When you read the accounts of his superiors, they noted his talent. One of them talked about having a brain well suited for any kind of intelligence work, and it is quite likely that Charles Howard Bury worked for military intelligence throughout his career. He was an incredibly gifted linguist. He had a working knowledge, or could at least say a few sentences in something like 27 languages, including French and German and Italian and various languages of India, and also Chinese and Tibetan. So he took photographs all over India and in Indochina. He was particularly interested in temples and holy shrines. Although he was a devout Anglican all his life, he seems to have had a high degree of respect for the religions and the cultures of Asia, where he spent much of his working life. And he became a hero at one stage in India when a man-eating tiger had been attacking a village and taking away people, killing quite a few holy men. Though when you look at his photographs of the holy men, and there's a guy whose ribs are clearly visible lying in a bed of nails, you figured the tiger would have had to kill quite a few of them to get any kind of decent meal at all. But he killed this tiger anyway, and that made him a local hero. He was loved flora and fauna. All his writings are full of the descriptions of the flowers, the plants. Can be quite disconcerting sometimes. He'll talk about a beautiful antelope he's seen, and you turn the page and find he's just shot it. While complaining that the locals weren't doing enough to protect their wildlife. In 1912, he inherits here, Belvedere, from cousin B. He used to send seeds from India and things back here to Belvedere, and Brinsley Marley would send him out kind of things like chocolates and marmalade and things like that. So it seemed to have gone on very well. But having inherited Belvedere and spent some time sort of sorting out the estate and all that, he then left the army and began his career as an explorer. Now, Aidan will be talking in great detail about the Everest reconnaissance, which made Howard Bury's name worldwide. In 1913, he travelled across the Tian Shan mountain range of China, Kyrgyzstan. He was one of the first Europeans to travel to the Tian Shan, and travels across Eurasia from Warsaw through Moscow and across by boat along the great rivers of Russia and across by horse-drawn carriages right across into Central Asia. And his descriptions are absolutely wonderful and really vivid, including a slightly amusing one where he's in Moscow and he notes it's the 4th of June, and which was Eton Day, and I've no one to celebrate it with. There were no other old Etonians around Moscow he could celebrate with. He noted things like pilgrims visiting shrines. He always had an eye for people's religious practices. That was one of the things that fascinated him. And he goes to the Tian Shan and took beautiful photographs. He was accompanied by a Sri Lankan servant and a large number of local people who were referred kind of disparagingly as coolies, but they were the servants, and they were really quite important to all the work that was done. And then he comes back through Central Asia again, visiting cities like Samarkand and Tashkent and Merv, and down through the Caucasus to Georgia, where he looks at the vineyards being developed by some German settlers there. On his journey out, he acquired a little bear. He describes him as the little bear, Agu. And Agu travelled on ponies. He used to bite the ponies, made off with the colonel's lunch, and he couldn't get it back from him. And by the time he's coming back, the bear is growing, and he has to spend more money on a seat for the bear on trains and boats. But the bear, everywhere he went, of course, everyone wanted to see this bear. And his language is wonderful. I mean, for instance, he's describing they're travelling across the Bosphorus. The sea is stormy. And he notes, he said, the sound of people being seasick was most disagreeable. But back he comes to London, and he was keen to embark on a political career at that time. He was Lord Lansdowne, and having Lord Lansdowne as his guardian was certainly a help to advancing his career. It certainly helped him on his journey across Russia, and Lansdowne was arranging meetings with him with conservative unionist politicians, including Edward Carson. But then the war comes, and Howard Bury was a reservist, so back he goes to the war. And he's at the front for 3.5 years. On the Western Front, he witnessed some of the very worst of the war, horrific. His diaries are an account of what he saw, what he experienced. He was there at Neuve-Chapelle in 1915. He was at the Somme, missed the first day, but he was there from early August. Was at Arras in the spring of 1917, where most of his men were wiped out in a stupid attack he tried to prevent from happening because he knew it was going to be a failure, and it was. He was at Passchendaele. By the spring of 1918, he was one of there were only about 50 people left alive in his battalion. And he was taken prisoner on the first day of the Great German Offensive in March 1918. Spent the rest of the war in prisoner of war camps in Germany. He escaped at one point, but was recaptured a couple of days later. And he was freed a few weeks after the end of the war. Comes back here to Belvedere, spends another year or two administering the estate. He'd given Bloomfield House to be used as a Red Cross hospital during the war. He's sorting out where the funds for that hospital will go to now that the war is over, and they donated to the Vincent de Paul in Mullingar, because they were looking after many of the hundreds and hundreds of ex-servicemen living in the town and its area. And he becomes the High Sheriff of what was then Kings County. Can't have had much time, however, for his duties there, because within a few months he's been off on the Everest reconnaissance, which you'll hear much more about from Ian. And he then comes back from Everest, writes this book with George Mallory, whom we'll also hear about today, the Everest Reconnaissance. His diaries, incidentally, of his trip to the Tian Shan, he'd intended to publish them, but because of the war, he did not. And that wasn't finally published until 1990, when the former county librarian here, Marion Keeney, edited the diaries into a book called The Mountains of Heaven, which is what Tian Shan means in English. And throughout the 20s, I mean, Howard Bury made a decision. He was a unionist, Southern Unionist tradition. But he made a decision that he would stay in Ireland and commit himself to the new Irish state. And he actually ran for the Irish Senate in elections in 1925, but didn't get elected. But he stayed here at Belvedere. The estate gave big employment. More than 20 people were employed just as gardeners here. And he used to open the house up regularly for visits by school groups. My Aunt May remembered as a child a school outing from Mullingar out to Belvedere, spent a whole day picnicking out here. And he was also travelling widely across Europe, but in 1922, he'd embarked on a political career. He was elected as Conservative MP for a part of Wolverhampton in the election of 1922. He lost his seat in that election, in another election in 24, but returned to Parliament in 1926 for the constituency of Chelmsford in Essex. And he remained an MP until 1931. Never was served in government. He got onto the very bottom rung of polity of government, what's known as a PPS, Parliamentary Private Secretary to a cabinet minister. But went no higher. But you can read online on the Hansard accounts his contributions to many issues, including India. He was opposed to Indian independence. Palestine. He had serious worries about the commitment to creating a Jewish state in Palestine and what that would mean for the non-Jewish majority population there. When you read what he says about Palestine in the 20s, you can see he was very far-sighted indeed in his views. He also campaigned for the return of the Hugh Lane paintings to Dublin. And he was quite strong about this issue. There was at one stage there was a flood in London, major flood, and the part of the Tate Gallery was flooded. And he sort of suggested, well, maybe that's God's punishment on you for not returning the Lane paintings to Dublin. And he corresponded with people like Lady Gregory on that issue. And then after his parliamentary career ended, he was touring around Europe. He was described as a very wealthy and eligible man. He inherited Charleville Castle from his mother when she died in 1931, but he much preferred Belvedere, so he lived here. He was colonel of the Territorial Army. There was British Reserve Army units in East Anglia. And during the Second World War, he served as a Deputy Commissioner of the British Red Cross, working out of Cairo, and later he was based in Italy. He was almost certainly involved in intelligence work still throughout all that period. And it's during the Second World War that he meets the man who will become his life partner, the very colourful and very interesting Rex Beaumont. This is Rex in later years here at Belvedere with one of his beloved horses. And we have here Mr. Tom Cox, distinguished botanist, who has been working with me. We've been doing he's done a lot of research on the life and career of Rex Beaumont. Rex was an actor, and boy was he an actor. His whole life was an act. Rex met Howard Bury somewhere, we're not totally sure where, probably London, during the war. Howard Bury was a gay man. There was no real secret about that. It was hinted at during his parliamentary career by various papers. One of the guests he had staying with him here at Belvedere was Captain Jack McNamara, MP, who was killed in the Second World War. Jack McNamara was a distinguished soldier, politician and gay man. But after the war, Rex came to live here at Belvedere, and he and the Colonel would be life partners until the Colonel's death in 1963. In the late 40s and the 50s, Howard Bury had a wonderful villa in Tunisia, in Hammamet, a place called Dar al Oud, where beautiful gardens, swimming pool, and they entertained all sorts of people, including Winston Churchill, Field Marshal Montgomery, the explorer Freya Stark, one of their pet donkeys ate Freya Stark's sun hat, and the novelist Andre Malraux. They had exotic pets. The bear, Agu, had come back to Belvedere from China and lived here for a couple of years, and the Colonel used to wrestle with it, as you do with a 7-foot-high bear. But eventually it went to Dublin Zoo, and if you want to see Agu, his stuffed head is in a glass case upstairs in the Greville Arms Hotel, along with pictures of the bear as he was when he was a little bear. But they had others. He brought back, at some point, there was a snow leopard, but it didn't survive the Irish climate. But out in Tunisia, they had a pet snake called Mahmoud. And Mahmoud, there's a photograph with Mahmoud in the swimming pool. And after Mahmoud died, he had an interesting afterlife because he became 2 pairs of slippers, one for Colonel Howard Bury and one for Rex. And people here, I mean, both Howard Bury and Rex were incredibly generous to local charities. I said Howard Bury was a devout Anglican. He served on the select vestry of the All Saints Church in Mullingar. He stopped attending the church out at Mullingar near Belvedere after the rector there sort of lost the run of himself and made a speech up at an Orange rally in County Armagh, more or less implying that Protestants had no rights at all in the Republic of Ireland. So the Catholic Church, they really, really liked him, because anytime work needed to be done on, say, the school or the church of Gainestown, near Belvedere, the checkbook would come out and the money was there. And when Colonel Howard Bury was 80, there was a special party thrown for him in Mullingar in the Greville Arms Hotel to mark his 50 years here at Belvedere and entering his 80th year. There were, as I said, 250 people, all the great and good of Mullingar were in attendance, and it was all presided over by Father Finian O'Connor, the administrator of Mullingar Cathedral. He was also, Howard Bury, involved with the Royal British Legion here down the years as well. Now, Colonel Howard Bury, he'd given Bloomfield House to an order of nuns, and it became a convent and school. He gave other lands to Mullingar Golf Club, for the present golf club is on this part of the Belvedere estate. He died in 1963, just a month after his 80th birthday. His last public outing was when they were opening a new school at the convent here at Bloomfield, and he left the estates to Rex Beaumont. And what we know, and what Tom here has discovered things about Rex, he was always a bit of a mystery man. Even the date of his birth seemed uncertain, but he was most likely born in 1914. He hinted and claimed that he was of aristocratic French origin. He described his parents as poor but not humble, and talked about his mixed parentage and his French mother. Well, his mother wasn't French. His father worked in the mines in County Durham. He claimed to be born in Yorkshire. He was actually born in County Durham in Bishop Auckland. His mother was a homemaker. His dad worked at the mines. He was an actor. There seems little doubt about that, but he sort of claimed, I think, to have been on the stage at Stratford and Avon and to have known people like Sir John Gielgud and Noel Coward. and others. Howard Bury probably knew Noel Coward and others, but we're not quite so sure about Rex. He served in the RAF, or RAF Volunteer Reserve, during the Second World War. He did hint in one interview that he'd worked in Bomber Command. He didn't. Most of his career seems to have been ground-based, probably at an RAF base in Warwickshire near Stratford-on-Avon. But at any rate, he left the RAF a couple of years after the war, and he also claimed to have been involved with the Red Cross, but again, it's not quite clear that he was. As I said, he kind of reinvented himself. He had a very posh accent, although my father, who was English, said he could occasionally pick up hints of a slightly more proletariat accent coming through underneath the very posh accent. He was colourful, to say the least. I remember Rex Beaumont. He'd come into Mullingar in the morning and nothing would be open until about 9:30, and he'd stand in the shade and said, "Does no one in this town do any effing work?" He was a great friend of my grandparents and of my Aunt May, who was an artist, and in fact when Rex came to publish a book of poetry, Me, Myself and I, in 1973, my Aunt May did the illustrations for him. And he continued to live here at Belvedere. They had beautiful taste, he and the Colonel. The house was beautifully furnished, and the gardens were lovely and kept well. He had a huge staff to do it, but they were kept well. He loved dogs, and he loved race horses, and one of his horses actually won the Irish Grand National in 1961, El Kaliki. He was one of the early judges of the Rose of Tralee competition. He went down to the Rose of Tralee, and then he'd go to the Listowel races where he had a few winners as well. And there were two ladies who had a cafe in the centre town, Shaw Murray's, and he would gather and he would serenade them in song in the morning. And again, he was very, very generous to charity. He bought televisions from my father that were distributed around to people who couldn't afford televisions or to nursing homes. And he entertained lavishly at Belvedere, champagne for breakfast kind of things, and 5-6 course dinners. There is a film made in 1978 for the BBC Northern Ireland by Frank Delaney, Vivat Rex. Probably still available up on YouTube somewhere, and it's a wonderful piece. And he was also interviewed in the 80s by Gay Byrne on his radio show, and Gay just sat back and let Rex talk, because he was quite religious. He became a Roman Catholic at some point in the 70s, 80s. Again, was great friends with all the local Catholic clergy. He used to entertain them to a dinner here at Belvedere once a year, but sadly he overextended himself and began to run out of money, and his health was failing, and he was no longer really able to manage the place here. All the beautiful furnishing and everything else had to be auctioned, big auction here in 1980, and then the County Council bought the place here. He moved out. He lived in a house just outside Mullingar for a few years, and then he reached an arrangement with the council that allowed him to actually come back to Belvedere, because he only really needed 1 or 2 rooms, and it's not an enormous house, Belvedere. And it was while he was here in the autumn of 1988, I think he was putting up a painting and he fell from the ladder he was on, and he had a heart attack, and he got into the hospital, but he died there. And he's buried, Colonel Howard Bury is buried in the Bury family vault at St. Catherine's Church in Tullamore. Rex is buried at Ballyglass Cemetery here in Mullingar. His funeral was quite entertaining and interesting. Not a huge crowd, but from interesting people there, including a local character called Angela Rattigan, who used to wash her hair in the holy water font. And she was there, and I just thought it was absolutely appropriate that Angelique, as she was known, was there, and we had readings from his poetry and other things. And Rex was the last private owner here, an extraordinary man, very interesting, definitely I think, we think probably a bit of a rogue, but but a guy who, in his own way, was rather kind and rather charming. And I said one of my memories of him, I was about 3 or 4, and I was in my granny's house, ratting away, and he said to me, "You'll talk your granny to death, young lady." So that is sort of said of the owners here of Belvedere, a colourful collection of people over a period from 1740, when this place was built on the designed by Richard Castle for Robert Rochford, to Colonel Howard Bury and his partner Rex Beaumont in the mid and late 20th century. So, Gurmila Mahakas, thank you.